I start by acknowledging the traditional owners of our country. I acknowledge the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people whose land on which this parliament meets. I also acknowledge the Dharawal, Gandangara, Dharug and Tharawal people, the traditional owners of the electorate of Werriwa. I acknowledge country not just because of the convention. I acknowledge our First People because it is the right thing to do, because in some small way I want to acknowledge their pain and add my voice to ensuring that recognition and reconciliation is something that we as a nation find a way to do as soon as possible. I'm disappointed to be making a speech in the Parliament again that will point out that 12 years since the apology, we are still not anywhere near meeting all of the targets that we set then, and only 2 of the 7 have been met. While it is good that the targets of early childhood education and the Year 12 attainment targets have been met, it is deeply disappointing there is little change for any of the other 5 measures. And it's blatantly clear that so much more work needs to be done with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders to improve the way they live and their opportunities. It is a tragedy that our First Australians are dying too soon, educated far less, incarcerated too often, and suffer more preventable disease. The numbers show this tragedy in real terms. 64% of the burden of disease on our First Australians is preventable. The unemployment rate of First Australians is 21%, 4 times the current non-Indigenous employment rate. Over 1/4 of incarcerated adults in this country are First Australians, and nearly half of all juveniles incarcerated are First Australians. The research shows that First Australians are more likely to be incarcerated than African Americans. In 2017, suicide was a leading cause of death among our First Australian children, aged 5 to 17. In that same year, 1/4 of all Australian children who died by suicide was First Australian. 1 in 10 households in public household is Indigenous. It is a social impact of these raw numbers that should break all Australians' heart. But what these statistics don't measure, what they hide in each and every point on a graph, is a person, a family like you and I. It is a mother and father that won't see their baby grow. It is a family that doesn't have their parents, aunties and uncles to tell them their history, teach them language or the identity of their ancestors. 8 Indigenous Australians have been members of this place. We celebrate their achievement with them, but it is the constitution of this land that must also celebrate our First Australians. I acknowledge the work of the member for Barton, Linda Burney, Senators Malarndirri McCarthy and Pat Dodson, and the Minister for Indigenous Australians, Ken Wyatt. But there is no question our First Australians have long been and continue to be the subject to cultural and systemic discrimination. And while we can't go back and correct the wrongs of the past, we have the ability and the power to stop those wrongs continuing and stop them now. We just need the will to truly want to change the future. We should start with the recognition of our First Australians in the Constitution. We should accept and listen to truth-telling. We need to work with our First Australian people to improve their quality of life. This report should be the line in the sand, but we've tried so many times to draw that line. From Wave Hill Station through Redfern and to this place, these lines cannot continue to mark the gap. This gap must close, and it must be here, and we must finally end the drawing of such lines. There is no option. We must act, and we must end the shameful and history of systemic discrimination of our First Nation people. We have the generational opportunity to improve the lives of our First Australians. We must learn from them, but we must learn with them, and we must close the gap.
Thank you, Member for Werriwa.